And just like Donald Trump, we're dauntless. We're back on the case. Um, I think the challenge here was my power supply. So we're still kind of operating at a power deficit. Anyway, oh God, I hate it because I was just getting into a flow here. Let's take a look at, and I hope people find this again, but let's take a look at the U.S. chart because I think the U.S. chart might provide us with some. I'm just frozen. All right, just trying to get linked up here. Painful, painful. I feel like I'm back on Earthlink. That's what it feels like. Okay, let me hopefully my computer will get back up to speed here and we can continue the proceedings. Give me a sec here. And if you hear me, I apologize for this. Right, I'm getting a little bit of traction now. So why don't we try this? We're going to go into the U.S. chart here. All right, and hopefully the power supply catches up with the presentation. There we go. So let's take a look at the U.S. chart for a second. This is it right here. This is known as the Simply chart, and it's the chart that Ebenezer Sibley, I think that's what his name was. This is what he used for the signing of the beginning, right? The Declaration of Independence, which took a period of time to sign, but this is when the first signatures hit the page. 5:10 p.m., July 4th, 1776. So there are two things to me that three things to me that really jump out with this chart. Let's start with Chiron. So the U.S. is going through its Chiron return, which it has already done many times before. But here we are again with the Chiron return. And one of the things that I had looked at for a long time with this Chiron return was gun control, right? Because Aries represents things like firearms and the martial use of firearms. And I really felt like looking back that this was going to be that Chiron return where they were really gonna come after the guns. And it's not because there was for want of trying, right? If we went back about a year ago and looked at the number of school shootings that were going on, really bizarre a year ago, 2 years ago. We had the shooting in Buffalo. We had the shooting here in Texas. We had another shooting in Illinois, right? And they all had these very strange, the shooting in Tennessee, in Nashville, and a lot of the people that were doing the shooting seemed very confused about who they were, if you know what I mean, right? So we had this rash of shootings, and it really felt like, oh, here we go. There's another cascade of gun control coming, right? And then I think one of the big problems for that was this manifesto that was leaked out uh, in this Nashville shooting. And it was like, oh, well, yeah, maybe America has a mental health issue. That's another like version of what I'm talking about. But I want to look at this from a different perspective. I want to look at this Chiron as we're going to talk about men with Chiron in Aries. So if you go back and look at the first go round, Chiron was discovered when it was in Taurus, and that was in 1977. But prior to that, Chiron had been in Aries during the 1960s, which was an incredibly violent time. And it was also the rise of second wave feminism. And men began to, I wouldn't say take a back seat, but it was like, well, you need to be more sensitive. You need to listen more. You need to do all these things that you're not genetically predisposed to do. Then, maybe there were some things in there that men needed to learn, right? But that was the beginning of tilting the scales further and further and further into a particular direction, where eventually this metastasized with the arrival of Chiron and Aries. And guess what? The Me Too movement, right? So the Me Too movement is almost like fourth or fifth wave feminism. But the difference now is that the second wave feminism began with Chiron and Aries. But now there's a shift in the axis. And Chiron and Aries feels much more like the reemergence of men versus the emergence of women that were more like men in the late 60s, right? When that second wave feminism started to hit. And so what we're seeing now with this Chiron return is the idea that uh, men are more willing to take their place amongst the ranks of men again. And I do think Donald Trump has something to do with this. So if again, look at the black male community, they voted, I think the number was one out of every four black men in an urban environment voted for Donald Trump, which is huge. There's a 20% upsurge in votes from Black American men with Donald Trump. You have the rise of the quote unquote Latino vote, right? And the Latino community tends to be what? It's very macho. It's a generally, it's a very interesting culture. One that is deeply matriarchal, but also deeply patriarchal. It's like there's this equal amount of influence in the masculine and feminine realm, but they're very different. Like one doesn't try to be the other. Do you know what I mean? And so they come out much stronger than any other president, any other Republican president in history. And again, this is this Chiron and Aries effect. Like who's standing by uh, Donald Trump on the stage when he's basically thanking all the people who helped him with his election? It's Dana White from the MMA world. And who does Trump make as his final pit stop? It's Joe Rogan, who has appealed to young men for better or worse. For the better part of a decade now, the Joe Rogan experience has been on for a while, right? So, then you have kind of the insertion of Barron Trump and his buddy Bo Loudon, who are out there to get the Gen Z vote. You get somebody like, Donald Trump goes on Theo Vaughn, who's a dude and a very flawed guy. He'll admit it. He's had his issues with drugs. And so, to me, the Chiron return in the United States is the re-arrival of men. And not just men, but also when you go back and you look at like a lot of Gen X charts, okay, you're going to get either Chiron and Aries or Chiron and Taurus. And this is the group that carried Trump. It's Gen X. And a lot of Gen Xers have that Chiron and Aries. And a lot of Gen X women have Chiron and Aries. And so were they able to be strong enough to stand up and say, I'm not going to vote for this person, even though there are people that are within my orbit that are putting a lot of social pressure on me to make this vote. So the Chiron return for the United States is a very interesting Chiron return. It's not what I thought it would be, and in fact, it's turning out to be much more, for lack of a better term, masculine. Not male but masculine in terms of its uh, input and expression. So that's the one thing that really jumps out at me. The other thing that jumps out at me, and this does get into the realm of like mental health, and it's Neptune. And we have Neptune down here at the final degrees of Pisces. And we've been going through kind of this Neptune opposition in the chart for a while because the US Neptune is at 22 Virgo, which is in its detriment, right? So we for the last, what, like 6 years, we go through this Neptune opposition. And it's been really clear that we've been going through it. And the third house is all mental, right? It's a mental house. It's Gemini's house. As a country, we've had Neptune going through here, and it can be very, very confusing, very incredibly confusing. Um, Now we're headed into this territory that is going to be really significant, really, really significant. When Saturn and Neptune move together into the U.S. IC, boy, the times there are changing. The makeup of the country is going to start to just radically alter, radically alter. It's really interesting. And we've been here before, right? Like the last time Saturn was in Aries in the U.S. chart was around like 99, 2000. What happens then? We go through a lot during that time. We go through a lot. We go through like Y2K shit. The stock market really fucking tanks. And but the thing that happens generally when Saturn goes through the fourth house is that in an individual's chart, the individual will move 99.9% of the time, the individual. And that Saturn is coming into the U.S. fourth house. So did we move in 99 and 2000? I would say yes. I would say yes. And not that the country physically moved, but with the insertion of George Bush as the president, we changed timelines. Because I'm convinced that Al Gore won that election. I'm convinced that he won that election. And so as a country, like we have to ask ourselves the question, does 9/11 happen with Al Gore as president? I don't think so. I really don't think so. I don't know what America would look like as Al Gore were president, but this is what happens. And eventually we catch up with it in 2001, 9/11. Saturn in the sign of Gemini, right? So something fundamentally changes during this period of time. And we move kind of off to this timeline, which I think is like the Kennedy time, which I've talked about. But we also didn't have Neptune there. Like Neptune was not knocking on the door in 1999 and 2000. No, that was not happening. So we're having Neptune going through the fourth house in the United States. You know, when was the last time that happened? You know when? It's the Civil War. That's when. Neptune and Aries, the Civil War. So we're coming back to the same position of Neptune during the fucking Civil War, right here in the fourth house. And then Saturn coming right behind it. Like this is a major, major time in the evolution of this country. Does that mean we're gonna have another civil war? You know, we're a house divided. That's for damn sure. You know, I played this video on Friday that was fascinating. And it was this Hopi elder. And I know some of you saw that on Friday, and I know some of you have seen this. It's been floating around the internet. And this Hopi elder talks about the man in the red cap, or the man in the red hat, or the man in the red cape, which sounds like cap. And he says that he's going to join forces with this other group. And he's pointing to this symbol that looks like a swastika. Now, I'm sure the people on the left, if they saw that, their fucking heads would melt. But the swastika is it's a symbol that's been demonized, completely demonized. So essentially, what this Hopi elder is saying is that there is this group that is very advanced that is going to come to this land, and they're going to work with the man in the red cap, and they will become an unstoppable force. Wrap your head around that for just a second. Like, what does that mean? And then on the other side of this mural, this Hopi elder is pointing at this other symbol, and it's the Iron Cross from World War One. I don't know. I mean, it's like, where are they coming up with these symbols? And then he talks about the four corners, and there's this symbol of the four corners where people are going to be assigned their various kind of positions, on the continent when this other group comes back, which is what he's talking about. And he uses the word purification, which I think is really interesting. And if you look at Neptune coming in here and then Saturn coming in kind of right behind it, right? Like, how do you not have a discussion around purification with something like this? You know, you could say, oh my God, it's Aries. Oh, now you're talking about Aryan symbolism. Oh, are you talking about eugenics? And, are you going to take people that are incapable of being in the system? Are you going to take them out, right, and dispose of them? Oh, isn't that what Hitler would do? No, that's not really what I'm talking about. But one of the things that this Hopi elder says is that there were people that were responsible for the despoiling of the nature of this continent, that they were responsible, and that they will be taken out and they will lose their heads in front of everybody, right? And so what are we talking about with Aries? Aries is the head, right? It is the head. And we've been dealing with Uranus and Taurus, although there's algal right over here. This would be, I mean, if we play this thing out, that the way this Hopi elder is talking about, like at a fundamental level, what he's saying is that the people that were responsible for the poisoning of the land, if you poison the land, you poison the people, because that's what's been happening. If you poison the land, you poison the people. Those people be held responsible and they will be dealt with. This is a very interesting video, and it's only made more interesting by the inclusion of the man with the red cap. And when we get into Saturn and we get into Neptune in the fourth house of the US chart, there's a purification coming. There's a purification and a cleansing coming to this country. And it's going to be very difficult for a lot of people. Very, very difficult. And the people who are losing their minds and are, in general, a threat to society, because they are. They're a threat to society. I'm sorry, they are. If they're in charge of something that's connected to an everyday service, again, like serving you food, or if they're that unhinged and they're willing to take their animus out on you, they're a very dangerous part of society. And at some point, there's going to have to be a reckoning. Now, I'm not blaming these people. I'm not blaming them because they have been uh, tweaked, altered, managed, mismanaged uh, every step along the way, and lied to, right? Lied to. And their expectations were set at a level where they were, look, there's no such thing as utopia. There's no such thing as utopia. And this group of people that I'm referring to, they believe that all they had to do is get rid of Donald Trump and all the mean people. It's just that easy. Just get rid of Donald Trump and all the mean people, and they would be left to just, puddle hug each other and or puddle cuddle each other, right? I mean, that's really it's the most naive interpretation of society in the world that I've ever run across. And these people are like children, and they're some of them can be quite bright, but they're also very damaged children, and they unfortunately they're a threat to our world. And I know some of you may have children or grandchildren or nieces or nephews that are in this category. And I pray to God that they have a come to Jesus moment, whether that's literal or figurative, and they wake up and they realize that they've been led astray. And I'm not saying that they should drink at the trough of Trump just to make it all better. No, no, like they need to find their own path in their own way, right? Maybe they go follow Derek Bros or whatever. They go off and start their own little continent, their own little land. But we're not going to get through this time ultimately unless there's a purification. And that purification is coming. It's coming. It's Neptune in the fourth house in Aries, Saturn coming right behind it. It's judgment. Like there is a judgment coming upon this land. And again, if you go back and look at that Hopi video, he's saying, look, you guys fucked this up. And these people are coming and they're telling you, you better make it right. And if you don't make it right, then the third judgment comes. The third judgment's worse than any of it. So I feel like this is where we are, and we're really in uncharted territory. So the first cleansing or the first purification is going to come at a bureaucratic level. It's going to happen. It is going to happen, and it is not going to go down well with the mass media and people like Rachel Maddow and Brian Stelter. And I don't really have a roster of who they all are, right? But at a certain point in time, these people are going to be held accountable, and the entire media complex is going to be held accountable for the absolute lies and the absolute distortion that has been foisted upon the American people. Now, it will certainly help if Donald Trump, right, deals with the Smith-Mundt Act so that the CIA can no longer use, uh, propaganda to insert into the brains of the American people. Like that's got to be dealt with first and foremost. Can't have that anymore. You have to cut that off at the source. Right. So this is going to be very interesting as this country goes through purification, and it's not going to be easy. The Saturn transit the fourth house, you know, I mean, the easiest thing with the Saturn transit the fourth house, you have to move. But sometimes for some people, that can be very difficult and stressful, especially if you don't have a lot of resources or you don't necessarily have a place to go, right? But that's what you have to do. You have to reset. So this Saturn transit is resetting the bottom of the chart for the United States. You say, well, Robert, what does it have to do with the rest of the world? The rest of the world needs the United States. Europe, the European Union, has a stranglehold on every single country in the so-called European Union. Like those countries need the United States. England, Scotland, Ireland, Italy, hell, even France, Germany, they need this country because they're dealing with a tyranny that might even be worse than China, right? At least in China, they're fucking nationalists, right? You don't see a bunch of Muslims running around in China, or you don't see a bunch of sub-Saharan Africans running around in China with machetes beheading people, right? Not like they're doing in the European Union. So one could make a case that the EU is worse than China, because at least China protects its citizens. That's a real problem, right? So, like, here we go. This is people. When I watched the Joe Rogan interview, I was much more interested in the comments than I was the actual dialogue between Trump and Rogan, which honestly I found quite uninteresting. But the comments were all these comments from people from all over the world who were praying for the United States and praying for Donald Trump because they know, right? They know that this is it. And you may think that Trump is the Antichrist. You may think that Trump is step and fetch it for the PayPal mafia, right? And you could have all those thoughts. At the end of the day, we're still the last bastion for the rest of the world. And and look, I admire Derek Burns because I respect him because he's dogged in his pursuit of like creating the third option. He's dogged in that pursuit, and I respect him for doing that. And at the same time, we also live in this greater kind of macro reality. And maybe if enough people get on board with his bug out and build or whatever it's called, it'll work, right? But I'm not sure if everybody is capable of self-determination and self-governance. It seems like that maybe it's a good plan for the future, but for now we're sorting out the direction of where this world is headed, and we're kind of the last chance for gas here, and the Saturn Neptune transit the fourth house is not going to be easy for a lot of people in this country, and because they're going to see things that they never thought they'd see in their lifetime. It's going to be pretty heavy. I think the big litmus is what's going to go down with Israel, what's going to go down with Iran. Is Trump going to go full balls to the wall against Iran. We'll see. I don't think Trump is a warmonger in general, even though he has Mars on his ascendant, right? He's got Jupiter conjunct Neptune and Libra. So I think Trump, by and large, is more oriented towards peace than he is towards war in general. But you also have to recognize that Israel's Mars and Trump's Mars are conjunct one another, and Israel's Mars is right on Trump's ascendant, right? And Israel's Sun is right on. We see Israel's Sun is right on Trump's midheaven. So it is a country that dominates Donald Trump. We can't not have that discussion either, right? Like it's there. I could throw those two charts right up there and show you right now. I've done it before. So that's another litmus. How is Trump going to handle the Israel crisis? Because it is a crisis. It's a humanitarian crisis. It's a genocide that's happening. And there are people who are on the so-called right who understand this. They're not just these dyed-in-the-wool, uh, Christians, these evangelical dispensationalist Christians who are pulling for, you know, Israel to win and slaughter all of its enemies. There are a lot of very clear-thinking people, on the so-called right that don't agree with that and still have the same kinds of opinions and stances that they do around things like freedom of speech and forcing the whole weird, like trans, uh, mogrification of society upon everybody. I mean, there's a lot of core value things that I think are shared, but then there's this dissonant factor with Israel that is not shared, right? So that's going to be a very important uh, piece with the Trump presidency. Let's talk a little about Pluto and Aquarius because it's coming back. And the governance that we've seen with Pluto in Capricorn and the Pluto return with this country, it's over. Like we're again, I don't care if you think it's all a show and this uniparty thing is just another act that is getting people to buy into this kind of new system where they, you know, put their guard down and they trust the government and then they get fucked in the ass again, right? Like, no, something with Pluto and Aquarius is coming and it's different. It's not the same thing. We have literally think Donald Trump, the builder, has taken a wrecking ball to the old structure. That's what happens. There's an old building that is decrepit and it needs to be taken down, right? And that's what Trump did. He took down this old structure and this old, like heavy duty, like bipartisan uniparty. Like there's been a wrecking ball taken to that. Whatever you think of it, whatever if you think it's just a dog and pony show for Pluto and Aquarius, that's different. This is a different story. This is the story of like RFK and Tulsi Gabbard and people who are this when Pluto first hit. I said the theme of it was strange bedfellows. That there would be alliances, there would be deals, there would be people that would be coming together in ways in which they had not done previously. And this thing with Kennedy and Gabbard and who else could you throw in the Weinsteins or whatever, right? They're part of the mix. They're part of this new thing that's coming, right? And ultimately with Aquarius, like here, let me just throw this out there. Let me just throw this out there. What if as a country, we all got our heads out of our asses and we all just started to pull together? Wouldn't that be a fucking amazing experience? What if all of a sudden we just looked at each other and said, you know what, we're all Americans, and let's redefine what that means. We're not Black Americans. We're not Mexican Americans. We're not white Americans. We're not gay Americans. We're not Polish Americans. We're not Italian Americans. We're all Americans, right? This is who we are. And Pluto in Aquarius begins to hint at that, right? And the one thing that, if you look at a lot of these pundits, like Glenn Greenwald pointed this out, Trump hit the working class in a way that no other Republican president has ever hit before. Nixon got a little bit of the working class. Reagan got some of it. But Reagan was really a kind of Republican elitist president in a lot of ways. That's very Aquarian. You start to unite the classes. That's very, very Aquarian. This is the dream of socialism. This is the dream of communism. When it's like, okay, well, we'll appeal to the underclass because they're being underserved, and then the upper class and the elite and the bourgeoisie have these lifestyles that make their lifestyles, look horrible in comparison. So Trump has done something very unique here. Is he's leveled the playing field and he's brought the working class into the discussion about what it is to be an American. Now, I don't think that you're going to snap a finger and this thing is going to like change overnight. But just imagine if we could all just say, "Hey, we're Americans, and we're in this together, and we'll do what it takes." Right? We'll all put our oars in the water and row in the same direction. Wow! Like, what would that be like? What would that be like? That would be a tremendous, tremendous force in the world. And now we're getting into this language of, making America great again, right? Like, for who was it? I think it was I forget who. It may have been Glenn Greenwald, but for him, he thinks that making America great again is circa 1985 with Ray-Ban wraparounds and a convertible. I don't really think of it in those terms. Um, but this is what Pluto and Aquarius is about, right? It's about the coming together of a disparate group of people to create something. And Pluto Capricorn is over for the United States and the return. So that means that these oligarchs. I mean, you can even look at something like Kamala Harris, for instance, who was backed by Gordon Getty, who is the great great grandson of J. Paul Getty, who of course was one of the original robber barons, and set this country moving right with oil. And so I think it's ironic in a lot of ways that one of the descendants of one of the great robber barons and one of the great oligarchs backs a candidate, and that candidate doesn't finish, right? So even that is highly symbolic in a lot of ways. So Pluto and Aquarius, at least for this country and for the rest of the world, is going to be a very interesting time. And to be honest, I'm actually looking forward to it because if you look at like really what happened, let's say in 2009, 2010, it's the beginning of all these color revolutions. And to be honest, right, if you really take in the 2010s and then and all the way up through the 2020, like 2010 to that decade is a period that is fraught with revolution. Whether it's Egypt or whether it's what you call it, Ukraine. You have all these color revolutions that are happening, right? And so you would think that that's very Aquarian because in a lot of ways it is. But we have these revolutions, like even the United States, we have a color revolution in 2020. It's the Purple Revolution. So from 2010 to roughly 2020, it is a decade of revolution. The guy who is the father of the color revolution is a guy named Gene Sharp, who was a professor, and that's exactly what his uh, life work was about, was overthrowing totalitarian governments using very specific tactics. And those became known as the color revolutions. It comes from his work. And there were a lot of things about color revolutions that have certain pieces to them that are all shared. One of which is that a color revolution is supposed to be fun, like drumming and all these things. It's like it's supposed to be a party. It's supposed to be like if you're taking down a statue and burning a city, it's got to be a party, right? That's part of the whole color revolution attack. But we've already had those. We've had the color revolutions. We had a whole decade of them, and now Pluto and Aquarius is very different, right? It's very, very different. And so what we're dealing with now is we're dealing with this battle royale of who's going to control essentially the remainder of the 2000s, in the world. Like, what's it going to look like? Are we going to have just more color revolution after color revolution after color revolution? And is the World Economic Forum going to sit on top of the pyramid of power, or were those days over? And what we're going to have now is the inverse of that. Are we going to see that the people who seeded these color revolutions begin to fall by the wayside? My answer to that is yes. We're already watching it. Barack Obama was clearly an architect of these color revolutions. When you look at what would happen, and here I'll even bring it up. Let's just take a quick look at it here. Let me get this off, and we'll just track the color revolutions as they showed up in the 2000. They started in the 1990s, but they really color revolutions. So they really take off in like the 2010s, right? Let's just take a quick look at this. So this is what I'm referring to here. So these are the color revolutions. Starts in 2000. The Federal Republic of Yugoslavia's bulldozer revolution. Then you have Georgia's rose revolution, Ukraine's orange revolution, Kyrgyzstan's tulip revolution, Armenia's velvet revolution. And then you have the revolutions of the Arab Spring, 2010 to 2012. So Russia, China, and Iran have accused the Western world of orchestrating color revolutions. You're absolutely right. Right, absolutely right. You can see this start to happen in sort of like the beginning of Bush's first term, the end of Bush's first term. Then we go to Ukraine. We have the Orange Revolution, Kyrgyzstan, right, Moldova. 2009. Here we go. This is when things really start to pick up. Now we have Obama coming in as president, right here. Then you have Armenia. That was in 2018. So obviously Trump is a part of that. We had the Belarusian Revolution, 2006. You have another one in 2020. You have some Russian protests. Right? So pattern of revolution, semi-autocratic rather than fully autocratic regime, unpopular incumbent, united and organized opposition, blah, 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 blah. Right. So this is the Arab Spring right here. This is the 2010s. This is exactly what I'm talking about, the Arab Spring. Tunisia, Egypt, Yemen. They tried to do it in Syria. These are all color revolutions. These are all happening during the Obama regime. Right? All of them. Right there. So we've had, from 2000 to 2020, a series of these color revolutions. In the months leading up to the events in Tunisia, Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Protection Communications Program Manager Jonathan Stevens predicted the use of collaborative internet utilities to affect governmental change. In his thesis, web bureaucracy, the collaborative revolution archived, the Wayback Machine, Stevens puts forth that unlike writing, printing, and telecommunications, collaborative internet utilities denote a sea change and the ability of crowds to affect social change. So we're talking cell phones, right? And it becomes a very, very big tool in the world of these color revolutions. So we've had them, right? We've had these color revolutions. And here we go. This is where all these revolutions were taking place. And they all, 2010, 2010, 2011, 2011, 2011, 2011, 2011, 2011, 2011, Djibouti, 2011, Sudan, 2011, February 2011, 2011, 2011, 2011, 2011, 20, just keeps, and these are huge, huge. You got a death toll of over 60,000 people, major protests, minor borders of Israel. So some of these, for instance, in Egypt, the Egypt revolution is a big one because what did they do? They increased the price of flour just exponentially. And then everything went haywire. People couldn't afford flour. And in Egypt, they used a lot of breads to like soak up their sauces that have a little bit of meat in them, right? And when people can't eat, then they get really antsy and they get really turgid, and that's when they're primed for a revolution. So we had an entire decade. You throw in the fucking color revolution here in this country in 2020. What is Pluto and Aquarius going to be like? If we had a decade of revolution in the 2010s, which we did, what is Pluto and Aquarius going to be like? Is it going to be more revolutionary? How can it be more revolutionary than what we've already had? Or maybe the revolutions that are going to take place are going to look very different. Maybe the revolutions aren't going to be as socially engineered as they were during the 2010s and even before that. They worked on all these models in Central Europe, which is where they started to perfect these color revolutions. And once they kind of got them down to a T, then they brought them to the Middle East and North Africa. It's like, okay, well, let's invest in regime change here. Like, let's destabilize these environments. Let's get people in these governments that we want to represent our interests, whatever those were. That's done, right? Because with Pluto and Aquarius, everything that comes after it is different. And I just showed you what we've gone through, right? And the apex of that was in 2020, where we had a color revolution in this country. And for all intents and purposes, Donald Trump was overthrown, right? And it was all on the backs of George Floyd and Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown, and they can't do that anymore, right? They have spent the political capital for that. It's done. It's done. It's over. So anything that's going to come out in Pluto and Aquarius is going to look very different than what we saw in the 2010s. I just showed you, right? It's all there. So that part of Pluto and Aquarius is just Aquarius is over. Like it's going to look very, very different, very incredibly different. And and I'm not saying that America is going to rule the sky, rule the seas, the world again, but it's very interesting that we've gone through this shift. And we have this guy who's our president, and for whatever reason, he's been able to bring people together. He's been, if you really take a solid look at Donald Trump, what he's done is he's brought more people together than he has in dividing them. That's how he won the election, right? That's how he won the whole thing. So will this continue, and will people continue to buy into the story? That remains to be seen. That is TBD, to be determined later. But it feels to me like where we're headed is very different than where we've been, and so different that the structure of the world itself is going to shift tectonically, right? Like you can look at the European Union, right? The European Union was created for a couple of different things. One, it was created so that it would ultimately weaken every single country in Europe so that they're all sort of this middle grade kind of experience with all middle grade output. No country can be more economically um, abundant than the other, right? Because they're all under kind of one rubric. So it's sort of lowering everything, putting everything to the lower middle for Europe. That's number one. Number two, to make decisions unilaterally for all of these countries. So the European Union is also, in a lot of ways, the last gasp of sort of these very old European ruling powers that descend from like the black nobility, the black families, and the crossover with the Rothschilds, who come into a lot of very powerful alliances through making other people rich, during a previous era. So they've got a seat at the table, and then you have, the so-called, the Pope and the Vatican and, these forces that have all sort of kind of kludged together in the city of London and Vatican and Frankfurt, which is the stronghold, the economic stronghold to the Rothschilds. And then you have Switzerland, who's sort of the head of the beast, right, in Europe and the European Union. And they would like no more or, no better than to rule the entire thing, right? Like they would like no better to rule the entire thing. The Venetians, the fallen pharaohs. And now you have this country which is back in this place that was revolutionary. Remember now, Pluto and Aquarius is when the American Revolution really starts. And here we go. We're kicking it off again. And what are we dealing with? We're dealing with, you know, um, you know, what was it, Cerberus, right? The Hydra. We're dealing with the Hydra. The Hydra is this multi-headed creature. It has one body, but it has all these different heads, right? We're dealing with this Hydra. And a lot of people, oh, well, Trump will just sell us out, the highest bidder. It's like, look, the astrology doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. And especially with this country. And I just showed you Saturn, Neptune coming into the fourth house. There's going to be a reckoning and there's going to be a cleansing in this place. And it's going to be very hard for a lot of people to deal with it. You're going to see things that are going to be extremely challenging because it's just the way it is, right? We've gotten to this point where everything is so toxic, so incredibly toxic. Our sky, our water, our food are relating with one another, right? We're going to have to strike one of the heads of the Hydra, and that's just the beginning. You are here right now to witness something incredibly powerful, and I may not agree with every piece along the way, and neither will you, right? But sometimes it's not always going to be, uh, you know, chocolate chip cookies and warm milk, right? Like sometimes these things are going to look uncomfortable. And there may even be alliances that we're going to really question and look at, say, what's going on here? Why is this happening? Why are these things taking place? And the only thing I will say is just wait a little bit. Like just wait a little bit because this is one of the things that Aquarius does. Is Aquarius is the great witness, right? Like to me, Aquarius is like the watcher. It just watches. It observes. It's detached. Like where is this going? And the thing with that you can take this to the fucking bank with Aquarius, right? When you think something great happens, just wait a little bit, and it may not look as great. Okay, when you think something really looks like shit, and you're going, oh, look at this, just wait a little bit, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, that didn't turn out the way I thought it would. So Aquarius really helps us practice some degree of neutrality and witnessing, right? Like our good friend Mario from Symbolic Studies talks about this whole polar orientation to the cosmos. And I would posit that this would be somewhat similar. And if you're working with the air signs, right? So you would have Aquarius running down the middle, then you would have kind of Gemini and Libra on the wings, right? And Libra is trying to balance out everything that's going on. Is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Gemini is internally engaged in the synthesis of opposites on a mental level, right? So Gemini is willing to play the devil's advocate, right? Gemini is willing to, stand up and, sing Yankee Doodle Dandy. Like with Gemini, it doesn't really matter. It's all the same, right? It's just, it's just it's one face, but a different mask of the same face, right? And then Aquarius is up at the top, and it's just sort of letting these two things do its thing, right? And witnessing what's going on. And that's what Pluto in Aquarius is going to be about. A lot of it is just going to be about witnessing and not getting attached to what something looks like because it may look great. And then, 2 or 3 months later, you're like, oh shit, right? That didn't turn out so good. So I'm not saying that every situation is going to be like that because some situations will be great and they'll be great. Some situations won't be great and they'll stay, less than great. But it's this one equalizing factor that is going to be really important for us to sort of step back and retain the ability to sort of witness things. Well, why don't we just play this out a little bit? Let's see where it plays out. Let's see where it goes. And it reminds me of when something happened in Syria when Trump was president, and it was one of those bullshit false flags that they run, and Trump was not going to take the bait. He was not going to take the bait, and I guess he had Ivanka, and she was crying about all the babies and shit. And so Trump, and he might have had Jerison. If you don't do something, you're going to look weak. So what does Trump do? He figures out, okay, we'll send in some kind of a missile, but it's not going to do any damage, right? It won't do any damage. We'll get on the phone with Assad or something. Give us a target that's not going to matter. That's what they did, right? And everybody said, "Oh, Trump's a warmonger. Oh, Trump's doing this and he's doing that, and he's just like Obama." Nothing else happened. Nothing else fucking happened. Did they take an oil refinery in the north of Syria? Yeah, they did. Should they have? I don't think so. Right? That was like Israel's little gift, Genie Petroleum. But Trump did not go after Syria. He if you just waited a couple of weeks, right, be like, oh yeah, it was all optics. It was all optics, right? But it was one of those things where just wait around a little bit. You'll see what happens. Okay, my ears are starting to hurt. It's for these headphones, and I'm not really sure how much more that I want to share, except that we're at a time of just incredible, monumental change, and a big shout out to the astrologers who were not sucking at the teat of political correctness and huffing the fumes of wokeness, and that you actually took the time to use the right charts to make the right decision and not allow for some kind of ideological bias to get in the way. Congratulations to all of you. And for the astrologers that didn't do that, and you went clearly unbiased and did everything in your power to whether it's use the equal sign, whole house, whole sign, whatever, right? Let this be a lesson. Let this be a lesson to you that when you use something like astrology, it is fucking neutral, right? And if the astrology did not favor Trump, I would have said it. I would have come out and said it, and I wouldn't care how many people it would have upset, right? And if the astrology favored Harris, I would have come out and said it. But it didn't. You know, we went over their fucking charts for like 2 hours. You know, and we even got into the vice presidential charts, right? At the end of the day, it's like it's Trump. Trump's the winner. The only thing I was concerned about was a contested election, and for whatever reason, that didn't happen. I guess all those votes that magically showed up in 2020 magically disappeared in 2024. They went through the Rick and Morty door, the Rick and Morty portal. Um, so yeah, it's like I hope you learned something from this. I really hope you learned something from it because astrology is a really, really interesting tool. And if you use it in a way where you eliminate your bias, the results are much better and your credibility winds up going up, right? And this is a profession that's based on credibility. If you're not credible, people are not going to watch you. They're not going to take you seriously. So in a lot of cases, these people who tend to be ideological predisposed are now 0 for 2. And David and I talked about this, where a lot of them were the same people who were admonishing people to get vaccines and saying that it was safe and blah, blah, fucking blah, blah, blah. I guarantee you that the same people that picked Kamala Harris. You may want to think about a different profession. Either that or you need to do some very deep soul searching because you're not doing anybody any favors whatsoever. I want to share with you a text that I got, which was, it meant a lot to me. And this came from some of you are familiar with Heather Eland and astrology with Heather. And some of you may know that Heather was, she was one of my students. And I mean, like, man, I downloaded everything to Heather. And she she took it and ran with it and has done just an incredible job in terms of starting her own practice um, and and really creating like a major school and opportunity for other astrologers. So she sent me this text, and I just want to read it to you. I just want to let you know that everyone on my team right now is one of your former students, myself included, obviously, and we all predicted the election correctly, unlike 75% of the astrologers out there. You've helped create some really solid astrologers. So that means a lot to me, right? That text meant a great deal to me because Heather is such an amazing success story. And then, like her team is comprised of people that have either studied with me or spent a lot of time in my work, right? And they were all on the button. They were all on the button. So, you know, kudos. That I couldn't be happier because of that. I okay, so let's go through just a few things here. Hit the bell, right? Subscribe, pass the show on, variety shows on, whatever. If you want to get a reading, go ahead and sign up. Those are links there. I do have an astrology course, and if you're interested in astrology, it's right there on my page there on YouTube, and you can. It's actually very affordable. It's a 16-hour course. It's $295. If you hold off a little bit, I think what I'll do is I'll do a discount for Christmas, and I'll have a discounted code if you want to get that. I'll make that available. I'll also have some discounted reading specials for people. I do the Star of the Day, which makes great gifts for people. That's available on my website. If you are a supporting member of Locals, you're a supporting member of Locals. I will have a special discount for my supporting members on locals. So if you remember, you can upgrade your membership. So I'll have some special deals for supporting members. I think that's about it. All right. I want to thank everybody who's been here tonight. Chataria, you're the best. Mods, you're awesome. And we're here, the dawn of a new day. And let's all just sit back and see where this thing goes. And if it comes to this point where we just have to throw down and just be Americans and all row in the same direction, then let's roll up our sleeves and not be too big about it. And let's see where this thing goes. I've lived most of my life uh, from a very cynical place. And a lot of that cynicism was brought on when I watched Richard Nixon get raked over the coals when I was a young man in Watergate. Watching him have to resign, that really changed my life in a not so good way in a lot of ways. I mean, I learned a lot from it. It helped me deal with being an outsider. But maybe the worm has turned. And so I'm ready. I'm ready to roll up my sleeves. And if this is where it's going, and we're all Americans now, then so be it. I'm on board. All right. God bless each and every one of you. We'll be back on Tuesday with the 15 minutes of flame and the astro weather. All right. Take good care. God bless.